How can we find peace of mind in the state of the world? How can we be aware of the suffering that's going on, keep ourselves open to it without that destroying us? This is essentially a question that I got from one of our listeners, and I want to share a few concepts and ideas around dealing with this. So for new listeners, my name is Kasper. This is Walking Our Path. This is my podcast where I go out on a walk and record my thoughts, my best insights, my best lessons, respond to questions, and I invite you to go on a walk with me. So, hey, why not go outside, walk in nature, maybe do something else useful around the house while you listen to this. And if you do, then please do send me a little selfie of you where you're walking. Post it to your stories, tag me so I can share it so other people can see the other listeners walking around the world on their own path. So, yeah, I want to respond to this question. And the question was essentially like, hey, I stopped watching the news and reading the newspaper about a year ago because I was like, well, why would I need to know about even more of all the bad things that are going on in the world? Media only portray the world as a negative, scary place, and I don't want to constantly be around that. But now I'm starting to wonder, aren't I shutting myself off from the suffering in the world? Aren't I closing myself off in a safe bubble where I'm unaware of all these things? And shouldn't I be more involved? And this is a challenging topic, I have to say. But I do have some thoughts about it, which I will happily share here. And if you have any perspectives on this, then I'd love to hear them. So first, let's deal with the first part first. No longer watching the news, reading the newspaper, I think in general is a good idea. It is, in modern times, one of the big challenges I see, I should say, is that we have an extremely high level of awareness of everything that's going on in the world. So we feel very highly involved with a very large number of things. And so as Stephen Covey talks about, the circle of involvement. But in relation to all these things that we're involved with, we have a very small circle of influence. Because, you're on your phone and you're reading about the ice caps melting, or you're reading about like polar bears dying from chemicals that are being put in the water in China to produce the phone that you're reading this news on. Where you're like, okay, so clearly I don't want these polar bears to die, and there's all these toxins in the water, and these are made to make my phone, so I'm somehow involved with this whole situation. But what am I going to do? And media is of course created, the messages that show up in the media are created to have a very strong shock effect. One of the reasons we're hooked on media and watching the news and reading the newspaper is because we have this primal desire to be updated about how it's going in the world, about whether we're safe or not. And being updated doesn't necessarily mean that you really know the truth about what's going on in the world. Because of course media select certain things that are happening in the world that will have the strongest emotional response in people. And they also curate it and distort what's going on in a way where you have the strongest possible emotional response to it. Because otherwise you wouldn't pay attention to it. And if you don't pay attention to the media, they don't make money. Because media is essentially a business, right? A news channel, a newspaper, it is a business. And this business runs on your attention because they sell your attention to advertisers. And of course, if you have a newspaper subscription, you're paying for it, but still, it's also being paid for by advertising because they're still advertising in the newspaper. So these are companies, and they need to make a profit. And they know that in order to make a profit, they need your attention. In order to grab your attention, they need to show you basically the most intense possible impressions, so that you are impressed by that and are interested and keep wanting to check in. I mean, you don't have to be conspiratorial or paranoid to just see that that's how that works. which means that essentially in media, in news, there is always a presentation of the worst things that are happening, and they're presented in the worst way. And to be fair, many of the worst things that are happening in the world are not being paid attention to, because you have a phase where they speak about a certain topic and they're like, oh, that's clearly the worst thing happening in the world. And then they just shift to another thing like, now be afraid of this. Now that's clearly the worst thing happening in the world. And the other thing is still going on. And there's lots of things that are really bad that are happening in the shadows that not even the news is paying attention to, right? And again, you don't have to be very paranoid or conspiratorial to see it like that. That what you read in the news is essentially not true, not because they're actively lying, but because it's always been filtered in the same way that your own thoughts and your own beliefs about yourself are essentially not true, or you don't know how true they are because they've been filtered through perspectives and all these things. Don't want to make it too philosophical or metaphysical, but let's see if we can agree on that part first. That in general, keeping yourself constantly updated day to day through the news is giving you a lot of very heavy, negative, fear directed input, of which you could argue it's not a good thing to kind of steep your mind in those kinds of messaging. Now, quitting the news, no longer being updated, is of course, I would say, in my experience, it's very freeing. It really made me so much more at peace within myself to no longer have, like, I don't need to know about another horrible pedophilia case. I know that this is something that's going on in the world, and it's not something that I can directly do something about. So why would I need to know about another one of those cases that's going to bring that horrible feeling up inside me again and makes me want to gather even more information about it and form an opinion and then talk to people about it, and then, oh, but this is my opinion, and then this other person has that opinion, and now we get to argue about this opinion, and how do you feel about this, and how do you feel about that? So it's kind of keeping us also in a social narrative of like being updated so that you can join conversations and that you can have arguments and that you can feel safe and justified that your opinion about the situation is better than somebody else's opinion. And right, so it's also causing a whole social thing, of course, and it plays a large part of our social thing because we have this primal social desire to be socially updated, to feel socially safe, to know whether our opinions are true. So these are all these really primal desires that the news and the media are really hooking into. And it works. Of course it works, because that's how our brains work. That's how our nervous system works. We need to be updated in order to feel safe. We need to know what's going on around us. Now, if you relate that to kind of this more primal principle, like I said before, it is, of course, like if you'd consider primal times, so to say, you live in a small tribe with 100 people, gossiping is very positive behavior, because that is the way that you are updated about everything that's going on in the tribe. And I believe that we are wired to live in environments where being updated about everything that's going on is a really good idea, because the circle of involvement, the amount of things you can get information about, was extremely small if you live in a small hunter-gatherer tribe with 100 people, or even a band of like 20 people. Now, of course, it's easy to be updated about everything, and you should want to be updated about everything, because knowing everything that's going on in a tribe, whether somebody's sick, whether somebody has lied, how the crops are doing, what the omens are for the weather changing, you know, whether there's a predator around, of course we should be craving to know all of this information. It would be dumb not to, because as humans, it is our ability to understand these things and to be updated about the web of things that have influence in our lives is one of the biggest factors that has caused us to be so successful as a species, right? So this is, our brains are extremely good at picking up all these variables and then thinking about, how do I relate to that? It's just that right now we live in a world where there is an endless stream of information about an endless amount of things that we do feel involved with, but the distance between us and being able to influence those factors is so big that we feel powerless. And this is what's creating a lot of stress and anxiety in the world and people right now, I believe, is that, like I said, we're aware of all of these things going wrong, but we feel like there's barely anything we can do. Now, there is a lot that we can do about these things in our direct environment, but we don't feel like it's making a difference because these things are so huge. So that's kind of my point on the news. Should you watch news or not? It's different for everybody. I notice I'm very sensitive to these things. Some people can watch the news and then just go to sleep and not thinking about it anymore. That's great. Well, by all means, watch the news if you enjoy it. I'm not that kind of person. If I read a newspaper, if I watch a news broadcast, I'm like, my brain just keeps going. I feel all these things come up from my body, like impressions that I'm processing, feeling very concerned or these kinds of things. So I would say in general, shutting yourself off from this is a good idea. But then the question is, okay, so, but aren't you then careless? Are you no longer open to all the suffering in the world? Should we just there's war, there's kids being bombed, there's people starving, there's climate is getting destroyed. Should we just sit in our comfortable room and just be like, la la la, it's not happening? Well, that's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure. I do know, of course, that there's many of these things going on in the world. But for me personally, I have chosen to create, let's say, to sit and think about these topics as kind of archetypal situations. So if I understand the archetypal situation of a war happening is usually a highly complex set of political variables, that in any war that's ever happened, there's so many things going on, so many power plays, so many interests, so many political opinions, so many people having an influence in a situation. It's impossible for me to know or understand everything about why this war has happened. So first of all, instead of trying to know everything, I try to sink into a place of, can I be okay with not knowing about the situation? Because whether it is a war in history hundreds of years ago or a war going on right now, war as a thing, I know, first of all, I have a very strong standpoint on it that it's not good. Okay, so I know war is not good. I know there's endless amounts of suffering that shouldn't have to be there, and there's infinite variables that I don't know or understand, and which cause me to not have a full frame of the situation. So I know I have extremely limited information. There's many things that I don't know. I already know that it's bad and that I don't want it to be there. So now what am I going to do with that information? And people go like, yeah, no, but this war is different, but that war is different. Okay, I can see that, sure, these wars are different. But if I really go back to the core of my feelings around it and my opinion about it, it's not that different. Because the core of that is that I do not want people to suffer. I do not want children to be bombed. I do not want there to be this kind of senseless killing in the world. I believe that we have a birthright to live in peace. So whatever war is happening, all the information, all the variables, oh, but you should pick this side. Oh, but what, clearly these people are the bad guys. Oh, but they started it. Like, I know that that is going on. These are very real things. I'm not trying to pretend that that's not there. But these are all things that I can get stuck thinking about for a very long time. And then I'm just using my mental capacities, my energies, my peace of mind in order to think about hypothetical situations or argue with people with different opinions while it's not really changing anything. So in relation to war, for example, okay, so if I believe that peace is our birthright, I need to be at peace in order to bring peace into the world. And that doesn't mean that I'm just sitting here as a privileged person in my privileged country living in actual peace where there's no war and feel at peace. But can I really feel at peace? Now, in order to feel at peace inside myself with, for example, there being war or famine or the world burning or the climate being destroyed, whatever that is, in order to really be at peace with that, what I've found is that I need to grieve. I need to seriously sit and grieve over this. And I believe there's two directions we can take. When you are aware of suffering and struggle in the world, you can go out, you can project outward and go, oh, I have an opinion about this. This is clearly like these are the bad guys, those are the good guys. What I should now do is I should go out into the world and find the people who are the bad guys and tell them that they're the bad guys. So you go online and you argue with people who are posting things about a conflict, or you're at a party and like you steer every conversation. So, oh, how about this war, huh? You check like, where are these other people? What are they thinking? Oh, but you're wrong. And what about this? And you go into arguments and discussions, and you kind of seek out things in your external environment that allow you to prove that what you believe is right in the world. This is one way where you feel like you're in control in relation to a situation. To argue, to have discussions, to seek out more information. But what we're doing here, and what's interesting, is that we have these biases built into our system that basically make us only seek out things that we already agree with. So now you're going out into the world, out into externals, seeking out externals, arguing with externals, trying to manipulate different externals that don't really have an influence on there being war. The only thing that does is it gives you a sense of control, which I would say is an illusion of control, that you're doing something about the thing that you care about. But while you're doing it, you're not creating more peace inside yourself. Now, what I personally believe, or I would say what I personally have found, is that these behaviors of moving out into the world and trying to have some type of influence or control over a situation that you can't control is creating more suffering inside yourself, because it is driven by something much deeper. Because if you would, instead of going out and trying to fix it or trying to gain control or trying to change the world to be more in alignment with how you want to feel, and you look inward, then you realize that there is probably a highly undesirable feeling, a very heavy, difficult, strong feeling inside you that you do not want to feel. That's most likely there. Like a really deep anger, or a really deep grief, or a really horrible, sad, like darkness, for example. And there's a good chance that that's how you really feel about the situation. But that's so difficult and so heavy and so intense to feel that let me speak for myself again, sometimes or in general, we have this feeling that's so difficult to feel that we believe that if I could only go out into the world and convince somebody else about my standpoint, if I could just win this online argument, if I can just post a mean comment underneath somebody's post who has a different opinion than I do, if I could only, if I could only do something in the external world to prove to myself that I'm right in my feeling, to get somebody on my side, to change somebody else's opinion, to say something mean to somebody that I disagree with, whatever that is, right? Then maybe I wouldn't have to feel this horrible feeling inside myself. But in my experience, that does not work. That's not how it works. As a matter of fact, I believe that 99% of people, aside from maybe psychopaths or sociopaths or narcissists or whatever, I believe that humans have a deep emotional, visceral reaction towards things like injustice, and war and child abuse, slavery and racism and the planet being destroyed. I believe that everybody has deep core feelings at their center about these things. Very basic primal things like grief, like frustration, like sadness, like this shadowy darkness, this really horrible, icky feelings that we don't want to feel. And in my personal experience, the only way to come at peace with these things happening in the world, with the fact that we live in a world where nothing, or I would say 99.99999% of everything that happens in the world is outside of our control. And that adds another layer of grief. So there's things happening that we don't want to happen, which gives us this horrible, unwanted feeling of grief and sadness and powerlessness. And then also the fact on top of that we cannot control any of that, we cannot change any of that. That has its own grief and sadness and this horrible dark feeling. And that is the way of things. That is how it is to be human. So instead of me destroying my peace of mind by trying to go out and do all of these things that just basically make my belief system about the situation stronger and worse, why don't I sit and try to come at peace with the grief that I'm feeling. So when I say coming at peace, it doesn't mean that I just sit in pure bliss while the world is burning. It means that I sit in pure acceptance of the fact that I'm powerless towards most of these things. The fact that I need to give myself space to grieve deeply over these things happening. And then, if I can find a sense of peace and acceptance, or allowance, if peace is not the right word, use the word acceptance. If I can accept that that's how I'm feeling, and I can connect to that feeling inside myself, then I believe I have the truest human response. And then from there, I can start to see that the other person on the other side of the fence, the imagined fence, the other person that seems to be worlds away from me because they have a different opinion, or they might be the wrongdoers, or they might be the ones who started the war, or they might, whatever, right? That those people are humans just like me, and at the core of their being, they might feel exactly the same. They might feel the exact grief, sadness, darkness, frustration, rage that I'm feeling in that moment. And from that exact same feeling, they may have chosen a completely different opinion, a completely different strategy, a completely different way of dealing with the world. They use different words, they use different symbols. They live a completely different life that I might be in full disagreement with on the surface level. But I know that that person, in relation to their loss, to their powerlessness, has the same level of grief, sadness, darkness that they feel inside of them. So, in all honesty, like I said, the most important thing is to act within your circle of influence, to only focus on things that you can control. So, it's not about shutting yourself off to the misery and the suffering in the world, just so that you can control your feelings. I believe that what is always within our circle of influence is our choices in relation to how we feel and how we act upon those. And what I found is connecting to that instead of holding on to my opinion or needing to know all the information or having all the right standpoints or arguments so that I could win over somebody else, things like this. If I can really connect to that feeling inside myself, I'm actually more open to connecting to others. So instead of arguing or going on discussions with people or getting stuck in just regurgitating whatever I've seen on the news, I can sit and I can actually connect with other humans from that place of accepting that horrible feeling inside myself and acknowledging that they might be feeling the exact same thing. So I'll give you a practical example. The pandemic times, I have to be this is crazy. I have to be careful which words I use right now, because otherwise my podcast might be flagged for censorship. I'm not even about to say anything outrageous. I'm just suddenly realizing, like, oh yeah, true. If I now use all of these words around the pandemic, then the algorithm is going to pick up on that and put like a warning flag. This is going to be hilarious to see if this is actually going to happen, but it probably won't. Anyway, so let's say you have two people, right? And they're both parents. So you have two mothers, for example. And one of them goes, oh man, I can't believe people are vaccinating, saying they're going to vaccinate children. This is the worst thing. These are the worst people. They're putting us in danger. If only they would change their behavior, my children would be safe. And this mother is sitting across from another mother who says, oh my God, I can't believe they're thinking about vaccinating these children. This is horrible. This is so dangerous. If only these horrible people would change, then I would be okay and my kids would be safe. Now, what's interesting here is that these two people in this hypothetical example, and you might have seen this example happen multiple times in the last years. This is why I'm using this example. These people on an opinion level seem completely opposed, diametrically opposed, 100% on the opposite ends of the spectrum. But look at how they're feeling. They're feeling exactly the same. They have the exact same feeling, like, oh my God, people out in the world are doing dangerous things. Below that is a desire that says, I just want to be safe and I want my kids to be safe. So now here you have two mothers who are closer together than they could possibly, like as close as they could possibly be together. Two humans sitting across from each other saying, I feel so much grief for having to acknowledge that the world might not keep my child safe, and I so deeply want to keep my child safe. And the other person says, yes, I feel the exact same thing, right? That's what's going on a feeling level. But in their head, in their level of opinions, they seem to be completely opposite. So what I realize is that in any situation, in any conflict, in any suffering that's going on in the world, there is the surface level of what you think about it, how you think you should think about it, what society says about it, what other people believe, opinions, political agendas, like all this stuff is going on at the surface level. But at the core level, we're all humans, we all have the same desires, we all have the same wants in life, we all have the same fears. Everybody wants to be well and wants their children to be well. And this is what I call the principle of the shared value. So if I can have an ongoing practice of standing knee deep in my grief, of having my heart open to the suffering, and acknowledging that I simply do not know, I do not have a better answer, I do not have a better solution than most people, I do not have more influence than most people, and to just sit with that, and to also stay there. And then if I speak to other people who have other opinions, or somebody, oh, but how about this suffering, but how about that suffering? I just try to go back to the core of like, yeah, there's suffering, and I don't want there to be suffering. I want to alleviate suffering, which coincidentally, if you speak to any Buddhist, is the essence of our path we walk on this world, is to simply, or at least the highest path you can walk in Buddhism is the path of the Bodhisattva, which is the path within which you alleviate suffering anywhere you go as much as you can within what you can do. Now for me, alleviating suffering is not going out and arguing with people who I disagree with online. For me, alleviating suffering is allowing myself to acknowledge the grief, to connect with it, to acknowledge that everybody else feels that way, and simply the way I connect to people, I speak to them, I look at them, the way I listen to people, the way I allow people to vent their opinions and their fears and all these things, that actually allows me to be more present, to be more loving, to be more compassionate. I believe that's the only way to alleviate suffering. To alleviate it in yourself and connect with the part of you that is compassionate and loving, even when difficult things happen, even when scary things happen, even when the world goes to shit. And the great examples, the great masters of history show this path. Like Buddha, I mentioned, Jesus Christ, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, people who have been faced with infinite suffering, have been subject to infinite suffering, have been involved with huge societal movements where lots of people suffered and have gone through horrible things, but kept their heart open and stayed compassionate. Now, I am far from perfect. I do not put myself in this list of people by any means. It's a struggle. But I do believe it is the most meaningful struggle that we have, because it's the only thing we can do, is to just be human and to feel what we feel, and to stay with that, to acknowledge that, and through that allow other people to feel that. So yeah, I don't have all the answers, and I don't know exactly how these things are going to play out or how it's going to be, but yeah, I've decided for myself, if somebody talks to me about, oh, how about this conflict over here? And they're like, yeah, wow, it's horrible, so much suffering, children are dying. You go like, yeah, and these people, they did that, and then these dropped bombs on there, and then this group did this, and this person said that. And I just try to get back to that same feeling like, yeah, man, people are dying, people are suffering, there's so much injustice. And then I notice sometimes in these conversations, they try to pull me to their side. Yeah, but isn't it crazy that these people did that to those people? Like, oh man, yeah, it's so crazy that people do such horrible things to each other, right? So I try to get back to that core feeling instead of getting stuck in the actualities of it and go back to that archetypal thing. Like, yeah, war is bad and manipulation is bad and abuse is bad. I don't want to feel that, but I have to because I'm human in this world. It's our only option. All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for tuning in, for listening. These are topics that are very close to my heart, and I'm very grateful that people ask me to speak about these things, which always for me is the most inspiring way to create anything, is to respond to questions and topics. So by all means, if you have anything you would like me to speak to, then please send me an email, hello@breathworkmasterclass.com, or on Instagram. And if you're out on the walk, snap yourself a picture, put it in your stories, tag me, and I can share it with the rest of the people walking our path. And then I'll see you on the next episode. Peace out.